Well, thank you for letting us borrow them.
You had to abandon our lunch guest.
Well, he's.
I completely forgotten about this.
Well, I remember when I first called you, and he said he's in the shower and I'll call you back. Do you remember that?
You. The thing is, we're not used to having a social life. So.
I think everybody's easing back into it, aren't they? All right, we're going to start soon for everybody online. And we are recording. Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to check.
All right, everybody, we're going to start now. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
But when we finish, my goodness.
Can everybody hear me? Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to get started today. Thanks for coming to the, I'm not sure. It's the AGM meeting, but I'm not sure which one it is, the 110th or something like that. AGM, fourth, was a little off with those numbers. So the fourth general AGM meeting. This is my first time presiding over this, so so forgive me if I'm sort of fumbling through it. I don't really know the procedures and everything, but there's a lot of you that have been here that can help me, help me get through this. So I'm going to start here with the agenda. Oh, I'm Ed Nano. I'm the acting chairman now for the society. And from what I understand, according to the agenda, we're going to have a series of disclosures about the financial situation of the group, people that are running for certain positions, and a series of votes will be taken, generally like a straw poll, yay or nay. And if there's a dissension, then we actually count the votes. I understand that it's not contentious in this group, so we should be all right. And then at the end, we're going to have Peter Hirsch, who's going to speak to us about the topic is hold on, let me look at my notes here. It is managing a wild site. Peter is a conservator for the Wimbledon Commons. He was recently elected, and he's going to talk about his works over there and the efforts that he's putting in to make sure that Wimbledon stays green. So we're all very grateful for Peter to come here and share his experience and knowledge with us tonight. So without further ado, let's jump into the schedule of the meeting here. Does anybody have any questions before we begin? Does anything sound wrong in what I said? Mark, does that all sound right? Okay, good. All right. So I have sent the agenda out to everybody that's in the room and on the call. Oh, and also I should let everybody know that the call is being recorded. And what we have a video over here. So if you have any objections to that, you have to say no. All right, everybody's cool with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the actual AGM meeting from Peter's speech and put Peter's speech on the YouTube channel separately. So if you just want to go and share that with your friends or your family, what Peter had to say, you don't have to watch the whole meeting. And then the question and answer will be along with that. So it'll be two separate events actually on the YouTube channel when we're done. All right, so let's start here with the agenda. So apologies for absence. We had a couple people send in that they were not able to attend in person. Brian and Shoshana Foster, but they are on the call right now. And Veronica Marsh and David Marsh are not able to come. They're actually delayed in flight right now, so they weren't able to come. I didn't get anybody else.
William.
Oh, yes, and William, that's right. What am I talking about? I have to do all of the speaking parts. So William Carroll, the treasurer, is not able to be here as well. So he has sent me all the details, the financial details, and also some narrative that he wanted to be read along with that as well. Okay, the minutes for the previous AGM 2020, we have to approve those in matters arising. So do we have those minutes? Okay, do I read these or how does it work? Okay. So, all right. So here are the minutes from the last meeting. Does anyone have any objections to accepting these? So anyone in opposition? Nay? So everyone agreed? Yay. Yay.
Yes.
Okay, great. That's how it works. It's a great group. All right, so chairman's report and review of previous year. So I have a series of you have to bear with me because I don't have everything on my phone. Okay, so we have a list of the membership for this year. We had a membership drive that we started in the middle of the summer. We paid a private company to produce a flyer that was inserted into the Time and Leisure magazine. Some of you may have gotten it. I know many of you did get it. And that was distributed across Wimbledon. It was also dropped off. I dropped some off here at the Wimbledon Village Hall. I dropped some off at the Wimbledon Library as well. And they were distributed as well during some of the different meetings. For example, like Val and Chris's and some other people did some distribution. From that, we had 9 new members join. Some people are in this room right now, so thank you for accepting the invitation and joining the society. And so the money that was spent for that, we ended up with 9 new members. We now have a total of 97 people who are in the society or affiliated with the society. That means that people who are honorary members of the society are also, so for example, Peter will now become an honorary member of the society after he speaks. So anyone who has spoken to the group becomes an honorary member. There are also people who are affiliated with the group who are not actual members, who receive communications from the group from time to time, but don't actually attend the meetings. So in total, we're close to 100 people. We do have flyers available for people if you want to put them in your business, place of business, if you want to send them to your friends, if you want to refer people along. We're always willing to have new members come along. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. We had 2 meetings this year virtually by Zoom. One of them was on Albert Camus, and the second was on Jean-Paul Sartre. We had a theme of existentialism that was running. I hosted both of those calls, and we had pretty robust discussions after each of those. Unfortunately, it was by Zoom, but we really didn't have any technical difficulties. We actually managed to make it through, and people had a lot of questions that were also lively discussion. If anybody wants to see those, we have a Zoom, we've taken the Zoom recordings and I've converted them to MP4 files and put them up on a YouTube channel so that they're accessible to everybody in the room. If you missed them or if you want to go and review them. And I can send that link out to everybody. It's a public YouTube channel called Wimbledon Philosophical Society. I set that up and started putting videos on there. There are some other things that are on there that were not recorded this year. There was a meeting at the end of 2019 with Peter Collins, Phil Collins, right? And who gave a speech, and I recorded that, exactly, the drummer. And we recorded that and put that up on the channel as well. So there was a previous Zoom meeting from the previous year, from 2019. We also had a garden party this year that was hosted by Val and Chris Morrison, where we had a series of poetry readings that was very well attended and very well received. We had a booklet that was published that came along with it, and I don't know if Roland, you still have some extra copies? They're all-
Yes.
You do.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
I can print them all.
okay,
Yes.
I see. Okay, so you can print on demand. All right, excellent. So if anyone has not received a copy of the anthology called Wisdom from Different Lands, that was the name and title of the anthology, Roland would be happy to share that with you. And Roland and Eva did a whole series of readings. And then we had a sort of open mic where people came along and did some readings as well. Again, it was an excellent time. We had a picnic before and the rain held off with the thunder and lightning until we were actually in the room. So thank you, Val and Chris, for hosting that as well. Recently, we've had Stephen Koch was our first meeting here in the Wimbledon Village Hall. We previously were meeting in the South Side House over in Wimbledon, but that's up for sale. So we had to secure a different location post Zoom meetings. And so we've decided to rent this hall going forward for all of our meetings, and that's why we're here today. So Stephen Koch was our inaugural speaker in the Wimbledon Village Hall. He went through and was speaking on a variety of topics from artificial intelligence. The conversation delved into many things, including metaphysics, machine learning, what is knowledge, what is understanding, and essentially what is thinking was the name of the title. So it was a broad range of topics, and it was probably the most robust discussion I've been involved in the 2.5 years that I've been here in the society, including the AC Grayling speech, which was very contentious, the conversation afterwards. So thank you, Stephen, for that. You really drew a lot of people into a great conversation. All right, so that brings us to the notes for the finance for the year. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to add to what I just said? Did I forget anything that we've done in the past year? That needs to be, go ahead, Peter.
And I'd like to ask a question, if I may, about the membership drive. If we have friends who are interested, could they come along with no obligation to a meeting to see what we're like?
Yeah, that's a good question. So absolutely, the answer is absolutely. And actually in Stephen's meeting, there were several people who attended who then did join the society after hearing what Peter had to say. So it is probably a good way for people to understand what the group's about and if it's really for them. So I would obviously encourage you to bring along your friends. Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I'm not going to read off the names of all the new members. There will be an introduction that goes out post meeting to everybody. So oh, maybe I will. All right. So Tony and Noma Brown, they're here with us. Welcome. Violetta Caden here as well. Rob Probin. Rob here? Rob is not here. Okay. Walter Reed. Walter's not here. Maybe online. John Shepard. I think John Shepard is online. Hi, John. Christine Sloan. Christine's here.
John Shepard left.
Oh, he did. Okay. I hope it wasn't me.
I think the quarter of an hour wait got to him.
Okay. All right. Well, he was joining us. He was the replay. I thought Christine was here. And Jillian and Hamish Turner, they're here. Welcome. And then what William has written here is the society's membership has grown slowly but steadily over the years, has had a loyal following. At the formation of the society, 110, scratch that, 5 years ago. There were 35 founder members, many of whom had transferred from the dissolved Wimbledon Wimbledon Literary and Scientific Society. Today, membership stands at 53 plus 12 honorary memberships, so that's a total of 65 plus another 33 that are affiliated. Society has a target membership of roughly 75, which is considered manageable. We also aspire to improve diversity and inclusiveness. This is a topic that we talk about in the council meetings a lot. We have a couple different initiatives where we're trying to get King's School involved so that we can bring some of the younger minds in here into the meeting. Recently, there's been a local publicity campaign to stimulate interest in the society, and members play an essential role in growing the society by introducing their friends and contacts, as Peter just said. With the resumption of normal activities post-COVID, we look forward to meeting everyone in the near future. Those are the meetings from William Carroll, the membership secretary. So he was not able to make it today. Those were his comments. Yes.
Add something about guests. Well, we used to ask guests to pay if they wanted to come to the meeting, just to come. But we no longer ask guests to pay.
Okay.
But I don't think that's ever put to the membership. If everybody thinks that's a good idea, that guests can come along for free for one meeting. Only once.
Only once. We're not very strict, are we?
No.
But no, that's a good point. I think, encouraging people to come along and broadening the base is always a good thing. I don't know where the 75 came from. I don't remember agreeing that that was a manageable group that we were capping it, but anyway, that's what he has.
I think it's one of those numbers that says, well, you've got 50 members, how many go on? Oh, it must have 75.
Okay. Yeah, because the affiliated people never come to the meetings. They just get the newsletter, right? Oh, they do? Okay. All right.
It's room size that limits us.
Yes, room size.
Okay,
If we had 300 members, we'd have to hire 34.
that's true.
So we normally think about 50. That's the maximum number we have.
I see. Yeah, that's
So
true.
we have 75. And we get 15.
Okay.
Well, there's if I may, Chairman, there's a parallel there that the society that used to be called Widfast, and I think it's now called Wimbledon Arts Society. I mean, they regularly have 300 plus people, and they use a very big hall in the Catholic Church. And if you sit there near the back, you can't really see the speaker and you can hear on the microphone, but it's rather impersonal. It would not facilitate the sort of interactive discussions that the Philosophical Society wants to generate, I suggest. So I'm agreeing something like 200 or 300 would be, even if you can get the hall, and they are available, but they're not very sort of warm and friendly like here.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's warm in here, but it is friendly. No, I understand. That's a good point. But we don't have that kind of demand anyway. We don't have people banging down the doors, that we're turning away. So it's not. It's in terms of pragmatic. It's manageable now. I agree. So let's see. Is that what's next? Election? Do you have the actual agenda right there printed out? Eva? Oh, that would be perfect. I don't have to keep doing this. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so here we go. Treasurer's report. Oh, I have to go back to this. So the notes to the accounts. All right. So the treasurer's report, again, William Carroll is in charge of the finances. We had an independent auditor review the books this year, who signed off on them just 3 days ago, I think. So it's been gone through by an independent third party who has verified that all the expenditures are accurate. There's really not that much expenditure. I think there were about 5 or 6 line items in there. The notes are to the accounts. The subscription income from the membership remains stable compared with previous years. Expenditure was minimal due to pandemic, consisting mainly of annual subscriptions for the website and also for the Zoom subscription, which we're using to record the meeting and then post that up on the YouTube channel. The development fund was used to fund a local publicity campaign for the society, which I just spoke about for time and leisure. And overall, there's a surplus for the year of £457.63. So those are the accounts. Do you have any questions about that? Keep looking at you, Mark, because you know what's going on. Sorry.
This is the £400, is that the development fund? That's the amount set for the development.
That's the surplus that we had for the year for the development fund. Yeah, we have a total of over like £3,000. So yeah, something in total. Yes. All right. All right, on to the next election of committee for 2021-22. All right, so there's a series of people that have to be elected. So there are proposed people that came out in the email for the EGM, and those are the. How do you do that? You just vote for that person? Okay. Okay. So the chairman position, we don't have anybody in that. So.
I propose that Mr. Head.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Let's put my own name in there, could I? Oh, you could. Okay. Thank you very much. And for honorable secretary, Val Morrison. So somebody want to? Going very well. Honorary. Is it honorary or honorable? Honorary secretary. Okay. Honorary secretary or honorary treasurer is for William Carroll. Is everybody happy to stay with William? Okay. Program secretary. Now, this is a position that is currently open. The role is to be filled with the committee, but is there anyone who is interested in running for this role, or anybody who's interested in filling this role, I should say, not really running for it?
You can describe what you're doing.
I don't. Oh, is that what it is? It's hosting. It's a hosting. Okay. Is anyone interested in taking over the hosting role from Val, who's currently doing that?
Okay, fine. Carry on.
Val, all right. Events organizing secretary, that is Val Morrison, but it says that it's open. Is that right?
Well, it is if anyone wants to take it.
Oh, okay.
It's a program secretary.
Right.
The program secretary.
Doesn't really have one of those.
No, it's never had
I think Lucy does that. Lucy does the program.
So the events organizing secretary is different from the program secretary.
Yes, we've never had it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what Val is the event.
So maybe we should just strike the program secretary. Okay.
Because they're all members.
Yes, all the whole committee does it.
Okay.
Now, any of the members can also suggest
Yes.
speakers if they want to.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So we'll strike that from the meeting. The membership secretary is also is William Carroll, who couldn't be here. So everyone happy to have William continue doing that? Okay. And then we have other committee members are Ann and Eva, who are here. And also there is a proposal, I'm not sure why, because I think Mark and Sarah are already on the committee. You haven't left the committee, have you?
I'm not actually on it yet, so.
Oh, you're not?
I mean, you know, I've been on it for a year.
Slyly attending the
Actually
meetings.
been approved.
I see, okay. So is everyone okay with Sarah remaining on the membership? I'm sorry, what is it called? The committee, as a committee member. Is everyone okay with that?
Well done.
You had a bad ego problem. So it's great to go through this. And Mark, and everyone's happy to have Mark. Mark, you're already on the committee, aren't you? Okay, so everybody else is already on. We're gonna keep everything the way it is. All right. There is an announcement on the agenda that there was an appointment of an account reviewer that I spoke about earlier. This is Tommy Bolin. He has gone through the books and has verified, as I said, authenticated that everything is accurate on there. Is everybody happy to keep? It's a pro bono position, right? Is everyone happy to keep Tommy Bolland as the reviewer of the? Okay. And there is an approval to. Is there a change to the Constitution that we wanted to bring up?
No, I think that was from last time.
Oh, okay, so I just copied over.
Yeah.
That. Okay, so that's my own fault. All right. Plans for the 2021-22 season. All right, so what we currently have in the works, we have several ideas that we're working on. One of them is to have a speech next month about an address about the current role of political discourse in this country. There's been several people who have brought up that it's something that would be very timely. And we've found, Mark and David have actually found somebody who is willing to speak on the subject and is highly credible. Mark, you know more about his background than me. Do you want to say something?
Lord Gus O'Donnell, who was effectively head of the civil service under 3 prime ministers. So Blair, Brown, Cameron. So he's very well experienced. He has agreed to speak sometime in December.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
so we've been in contact with the Southside House because we think that this venue will not be large enough for him. It'd be like the AC Grayling speech. Quite a few people will want to come to it because he's a well-known, high-profile individual. So we've been in contact with Southside House, negotiating with them back and forth of what it would take to actually rent the place and actually get it COVID ready and all the different protocols that we're working on. We haven't quite nailed the date down. We thought we had December 6th, but we're still working on that. So as soon as we find out from his secretary and his staff when he's going to be able to talk, then we'll pass that out to the group.
There is an issue with Southside House, if I may say. It's a very charming venue, but in the middle of winter, they don't eat very much. And
Okay,
I would say everybody should bring 2 or 3 extra layers.
it's good advice then.
What about the hall in Wimbledon Park with the tree?
That's it, that's so much people.
Okay. So that was actually proposed at the same time as this hall, and we ended up going here because this was more centrally located, but that would be a good backup. It's not an issue really with Southside House. It's really an issue with his schedule. He's very, very much in demand. He's going to be in Canada doing, addressing something at the time. So we're trying to work the logistics out for that. But if the Southside House doesn't work, this is our backup that you're referring to. So we hope to get that firmed up, and thanks, Mark, for for doing all the legwork on that. We hope to get that firmed up in the next couple of weeks, hopefully within the next week, so that we can get that out. And
maybe we can raise the issue of heating, where they have some heaters that don't make a noise.
they're pretty particular. So I spoke with the management over there. I don't want to get too far off track. The management, they're very particular. They treat it like a museum, and you can only do certain things. Like you can only eat and drink in this room. you can't take it out of the room, and so I guess everything in there is very delicate. I've been in there once for the railing speech, but I wasn't aware of it. But we can ask what. The next, there is a whole schedule of events that Mark and I have discussed for the upcoming year. I'm not going to go into those details yet because none of them have been confirmed or even really we're in the rudimentary stages of talking about them. But we have several political philosophy conversations that would be going on. Plus, we're trying to bring someone in to speak on the topic of religion, which is something that is interesting in the society. So if anybody has any suggestions of what they would like.
Yeah, I'd like to make a suggestion actually, alongside Gus O'Donnell, which would be absolutely fantastic. And I find that it worked at one point. I would like to recommend a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, who's a political scientist at Berkeley. He's called Eric Kaufman. He's quite well known. He's published 6 or 7 books. He's a Canadian, and he's very reflective in terms of what's happening with migration and various other issues in Europe and the UK.
Okay.
We could maybe talk about it offline.
Yeah, we should. So one of the things that we are talking about having, I just said I wasn't going to talk about all these other possible things, but we are talking about having a panel of people to discuss several topics around austerity and also setting of the target interest rate, inflation rate for the country. So there may be some areas of overlap where maybe we could have them come in either separately or, to speak on this panel. We also have David Marsh who's interested in speaking as well on a variety of different topics. Bruno also has a think tank that he belongs to, that there are several professors in the university that are looking to speak as well. So I think this might be the right venue for that. We can talk about that further. That could end up being a pretty large event if we had four panelists.
Make the order.
Well, they don't ever agree, do they? Isn't that the point? Are you recording?
I'm just preparing something interesting.
Okay. So that's what we have on the agenda. There's quite a few things. We have 4 meetings a year, but and the garden party, right? So we're a fairly active group in the sense of that. I don't think that we could probably handle much more on the calendar for that. So we do have 4 events that we're trying to schedule for next year. But if anybody has any suggestions, please send them along because I'd like to hear, what it is that you'd like to hear more about. All right. And so I guess the next thing on the agenda is any other business. Does anyone have any other business that they want to talk about that hasn't been raised on the call? Anyone? No. All right. All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming today and for, having a relatively successful AGM. No one objected to anything. There were no fist fights. And thank you everyone for a success. I think a successful year considering the limitations that we had in terms of meeting, the environments that we had to meet in using Zoom. We had fairly robust conversations after each one of the things. So seems like things are things went very well last year. That would be my assessment of it. And
Let's propose a round of applause for those who have hosted events in their private homes, such as Chris and Val.
yes, very good. Susan had offered as well. We just ended up not meeting. We had another venue that came up, but thank you offered as well. We were going. One of the things about this group is the generosity of the people that are part of it, and that's really that's something that's very obvious to me as a foreigner. So thank you. So moving on to the next, it will be time to listen to Peter, and I'll give it over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Do you actually want to take a break, or does anybody want to drink before Peter starts? Okay, let's do that. Let's take 10 minutes, and then we'll let Peter. This is your neighbor, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's see what I talk about then. Is the next one?
Oh, we've got my
Let's put it
notes.
on the agenda for the next meeting, so that we make sure that it's because there's a lot of stuff going on with Oh, absolutely. It's on, we have a draft agenda already. All right, everybody, if we could get back to the seats. They were having some lively conversations. It's great to see it. Something I don't see it. Reading or something. With a soothing voice. We're gonna have Peter come up now. Pete, where is Peter? Peter has disappeared. A bit of stage fright, is it?
It took too long, he's gone home.
He's kind of. He left you here, though. Enjoyed the what?
Prayer meeting.
The prayer meeting. Is there a prayer meeting? Oh, really? Oh, okay, he's coming. Yeah, I can't hear him now. There he is. He was waiting for the entrance, you see. Ah.
Oh, well, that's right. I was tempted. Yes, especially like I said. So. Yes. How's that? Can you hear me all right? Yes. And can our friends online hear me as well?
Yes.
I think maybe they all left. Hello, everybody. Right. Okay, I'm Peter Hirsch. Thanks for the introduction, Ed. And the name of my talk is Managing a Wild Site. So there's supposed to be a little contradiction in that title. And I'm hoping to provoke some thought and some interesting questions and debate through raising some of the innate difficulties and contradictions involved in trying to preserve and protect a wild site in what estate agents would say is central London, or perhaps we'd say is suburban, inner or middle London. And that is no straightforward task. So I have lived with my wife, Mary, who's sitting here on the front row, and family in Wimbledon for approximately 35 years. I was a founding member of WPS, and Ed mentioned the predecessor society, the Wimbledon Literary and Scientific Society, was it? Yeah, which we were also members of. We sort of transferred over. In fact, we were adamant we didn't want the old society to die, and when its membership voted itself out of existence, we said, well, okay, but like a phoenix, we will rise from the ashes, which is what we did. And I must say that you are all doing so well. I mean, the society is thriving, and it's really delightful to see that. The main reason I've been invited to give this talk is that in 2018, so 3.5 years ago, I stood for election as Conservator of the Commons, that is Wimbledon and Putney Commons, to give it its full name. And the period that we're elected for is 3 years. So we had another election at the beginning of this year, and I was re-elected. So for those of you who voted for me, thank you very much for your trust. It's an honor to be elected as a Conservator. And for those of you who perhaps voted for somebody else or didn't vote at all, maybe next time if I stand again, I might ask for your support. I would, as I intimated, I would very much welcome questions and discussions through the chair when I conclude my remarks. And I don't plan to speak for too long, perhaps roughly half an hour. If there's something I say which you can't hear or don't understand, ask me immediately, but I suggest any more provocative or interesting discussion and questions is left at the end, and that's up to the channel. Let me say clearly at the beginning that the views I'm going to express are my own personal views. I am not here to speak on behalf of the board of the Commons. And on the board, we make our decisions usually by consensus, or occasionally when we can't quite reach consensus, we have a vote. And we then apply the usual Chatham House rules that once we've made the decision, we don't have individual board members going off and say, oh, they pushed it through, but I didn't agree with it. So I'm not going to go anywhere like that. And it might be worth saying, I didn't write this in my speech, but why? Oh yeah, there's one other thing I need to say, health and safety notice. You will notice that my voice is a little croaky, and I hope I make it to the end. And also, I hope it doesn't happen, but I've got a bit of a cough, and I'm a little rough around the edges. I've got a cold. Now, because we're all a bit nervous about the pandemic, I voluntarily took a lateral flow test yesterday evening, less than 24 hours ago, and I'm pleased to tell you it was negative. So I do not have the dreaded virus. And if I sound a bit rough, apologies, but it's not that. I just wanted to allay any worries you might have. Wimbledon and Putney Commons are so important to most of us, perhaps all of us. I mean, why did we move to Wimbledon? A few of us perhaps were born here, but many of us chose to come. And I'm sure that, like us, a big part of that decision was this amazing resource that we have right here in the heart of Wimbledon and Putney. It is really unparalleled and absolutely worth preserving, conserving, and improving, which is why I stood. And in 2018, I'm not at all going into the contentious history, but there had been a lot of conflict and trouble on the board in the previous 6 years or so. It was quite well documented at the time in the press and on websites. I'm not going to go into all of that, but a group of us concerned citizens, if you like, for want of a better word, decided up with this we will not put. We are going to put, to mention our election slogan, some common sense back into the Commons. And on that basis, there are 5 positions that are elected every 3 years. 4 of the 5 of us got in. So clearly this hit a chord with the voting public of Wimbledon and Putney. The voting public, by the way, are the levy payers. I'll come to that shortly. So our key mission as a board is to conserve, enhance, and protect the Commons' natural aspect and wildlife for present and for future generations, just like previous conservators did for their generations and indeed for us. In short, to keep it unenclosed, unbuilt, and open to the public. That's our mission. That's why we're there. Now, I'm going to give you a dilemma to think about, and I'll come back to this near the end. So it's almost like a little test question for you. And this is a true case. Quite recently, a little girl was cycling on the Commons with her father along one of our signposted cycle routes. You know how, according to our bylaws, you're not allowed to cycle except on routes which are marked as cycle paths. It's shown on maps, and there are little cycle panels to show the cycle route. It had been raining, the path is not in very good condition, and there were potholes, and because of the rain, many puddles. The little girl fell off her bike, fortunately was not seriously hurt. The father was furious, according to eyewitnesses, and submitted a complaint. Here's your dilemma. You are a conservator. What would you do about it? Okay, I'm going to come back to that at the end, so have a little think. Back a little bit to the history. This isn't primarily a history lesson, but I thought I'd tell you why the Commons are there. And that's part of, the reason that they're there is part of the dilemmas and contradictions that are with us to this present day. There were 2, as far as my research, I'm not a professional historian, but I've done some research and read a lot of documents, including the Commons' own documents on this. There were 2 historic trends that played a seminal part in the foundation and preservation of Wimbledon and Putney Commons as we know it. The first was the start of the conservation movement And this was strongly influenced by John Evelyn and his work Sylvia, which was presented as a paper to the British Royal Society in 1662. I guess then it was the English Royal Society, because that was before the Act of Union. Sylvia, the paper, or A Discourse on Forest Trees, was written by him to encourage landowners to plant trees to provide timber for England's burgeoning navy. So he was a conservationist, but there was an economic driver behind this as well. The recent English Civil War had led to extensive deforestation as trees were felled for military purposes or sold off for ready cash. So fresh supplies of timber were urgently needed for shipbuilding. Evelyn has been called the founder of the conservation movement and Britain's first great environmentalist. So this was the beginning of a feeling that nature and the environment is not an unlimited resource that we can just go and cut down and pluck and use whenever we want to. We have to nurture it and husband it. He was the first one. And note that there was in Wimbledon a John Evelyn Club, later society, and now called the Wimbledon Society, a very well-known society. Now, interestingly, I believe they named it after him because of his commitment to conservation, although he had no known connections with Wimbledon. He didn't live here or work here or anything, but they took him as a hero. I believe the Wimbledon Society did give a talk about John Evelyn a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, we're members, but I didn't attend the talk, and I don't know what they said. So I hope I didn't contradict it. So that was one trend, the burgeoning conservation movement. And the second trend, which led in a similar direction, was, of course, the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the 18th century. It led to a number of major changes in our society. And the main ones I want to mention are population migration from the countryside to the cities, move from a predominantly agrarian economy to industrial, increase in population overall, expansion of cities, which of course happens if you move a lot of people into cities, and a gradual increase of disposable income and the leisure time of urban dwellers. That was gradual, but it has happened. And lastly, as any of you know who will watch people like Michael Portillo on TV, improved transport and greater mobility. So, and remember, this was in the 18th century, so actually it started in the 18th century, the 1700s. It was around the mid-1700s when the Industrial Revolution started, and it really reached its peak in the early 1800s. What am I saying? Yeah, 1800s. Consequently, in Britain and other industrial societies, ever fewer people lived in the countryside, and this led to a nostalgia for the countryside and rural values, you know, some of which is genuine nostalgia, some of which is a fantasy, but they're both there. And I expect many of us can relate to that. I mean, I've never personally lived in the countryside, but I do like being in it. And by the early 1800s, the agricultural population of Britain had sunk to about a third of the total population. So this is important because common land, like what became Woodland Commons, had existed since feudal times. It used to be regarded as uneconomic, as wasteland. However, as the pressure on land increased, especially near the new conurbations, its value started to rise. Many owners, who were mainly lords of the manor, were motivated to monetize their commons, and the most obvious way to do that is enclosing it, developing, and selling it off. Oh, by developing, I mean just like today, by building houses and other building development. In the 1860s to the 1870s, social pressure reached a crescendo, and Parliament passed, under public pressure, a number of Metropolitan Commons Acts, which allowed local authorities to create parks, commons, and other public spaces free for public use. Now, in South London, we're particularly lucky And the commons and parks that still exist include Wandsworth, Clapham, Tooting, Peckham Rise, Stretton, Blackheath, and Sydenham. However, all the others still exist, but Sydenham Common was enclosed or lost. I didn't do any further research into that because it's not directly relevant to Wimbledon and Putney Commons, but it's quite interesting to know that mostly it was successful, but it's not guaranteed. We have to be careful. By 1864, so coming back now to Wimbledon and Putney, Earl Spencer, the Lord of the Manors, and I guess Princess Diana's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, I'm not sure how many greats, put a bill before Parliament to enclose large parts of Wimbledon and Putney Commons because, quote, and this was in the draft act of the bill, the parliamentary bill, the land is boggy and noxious mists and fogs arise from it, and great nuisance is caused by gypsies whose encampments and activities he had insufficient power to control. A little bit of deja vu there, anyway. So the hero of the day was Henry W. Peake. You may have heard of him. He led a popular movement with the object of preserving the whole of Wimbledon Common and Putney Heath unenclosed for the benefit of the neighbourhood and the public. After lengthy negotiations, the Wimbledon and Putney Commons Act received royal assent in August 1871. And that is why this year we are celebrating our 150th birthday. As, by the way, is Hampstead Heath. Its history is very similar. Except that we were founded in a separate parliamentary act, a special act that established the Wimbledon and Putney Commons Conservators. So we were founded by a particular act of parliament, unlike the parks and commons that I mentioned before, which were passed, the ownership of which was passed to local authorities like Wandsworth Council. And then Hampstead Heath is a different situation again. They're owned and run by the City of London authority or body. I'm not quite sure of the details, but City of London owns and runs them. Earl Spencer was compensated with a sum of £1,200 to be paid as a perpetual annuity. So 1,200 a year, quite a lot of money then. And only in the 1960s, 60 years ago, was the money raised by WPCC to purchase the annuity. So we paid him off and he doesn't have any rights anymore. But only in my lifetime did that happen. Now, the main provisions of the Act were to set up a body of conservators, 5 elected, I'm one of them, and 3 appointed, representing both public and local interests. And we are charged with the duty of keeping the commons open, unenclosed, unbuilt on, and their natural aspect preserved. I already used that phrase once, but it's so important, I don't mind repeating it. And a rate was to be levied on local residents to keep up the payments and maintain the commons. Houses within 3/4 of a mile of the perimeter of Wimbledon Common, or within the old parish of Putney, which is a slightly bigger area on the Putney side, are subject to an additional levy limited by the Act. It's now charged on top of council tax and very kindly collected by the local authority. Merton, Wandsworth, or Kingston. There's a few houses in Kingston. And by the way, if you are a levy payer, you'll see on your council tax bill, you'll see there's a line of Wimbledon and Putney Commons levy. And if you pay it, you're also entitled to vote. That is our electorate, the levy limits. So this provision is very important for the Commons as it provides us with an independent source of income that does not depend on funding from local or central government. We're lucky to have this arrangement, which municipal parks or commons, or indeed the royal parks, the former royal parks, don't have. Just very briefly to mention, the royal parks are separate again. They were mainly founded much earlier on in the 13th or 14th century, like Richmond Park, the well-known local one. They used to be paid directly by the government. I mean, they used to be crown land. It used to be owned by the king for hunting. And they were effectively privatized about 10 years ago, and they now get some money from central government, and the rest they have to fundraise, which is why parks like Hyde Park are constantly having pop concerts and all sorts of other events. I mention that because it's relevant to what I'm about to say. Interesting to note that the shape of the commons has not been frozen in aspect. Two examples, the Richardson Evans playing fields, they're down by the Romney roundabout, if you know those. As you're driving away from central London, they're on the left, just before you go around the roundabout. They were added, a benefactor gave them to the commons in the early 1900s. And of course, we're subject to the laws of the land. You know, Parliament can't restrict what future parliaments do. And we have been affected by compulsory purchase. The most well-known example was the Compulsory Purchase Act when the A3 was widened and straightened in the 1960s, leading to the underpass and Tebbett's Corner roundabout and the dual carriageway. We didn't have any choice, we had to submit to that, but we were compensated by giving land which was used to make Putney Lower Common. And if any of you have discovered that, it's an outlier, it's not connected to the rest of the commons, and people here at the Wimbledon end don't know it so well, but it's between Richmond, what's called Lower Richmond Road, near Barnes, and the river, and it goes all the way down to the river. If you haven't been there, I recommend you go look at it. It feels different to the rest of the commons, but it's a nice piece of open land as well. In spite of the levy, this is where we get a bit controversial. WPCC, Wimbledon and Putney Commons Conservatives, are underfunded. Informal surveys have shown that visitors to the commons come from far away, often much further than the 3/4 of a mile in our founding act. Should the quantum of the levy be increased, or should the collection area be expanded, or both? Such changes probably require an act of Parliament. And getting private acts through Parliament is quite a complicated and can be a very expensive procedure. So we're thinking about that, but we haven't actually made a firm proposal yet. In addition to the levy, we have other sources of income, of course, such as income from playing fields and golf fees, because there are 2 golf courses on the commons. By the way, they were there before we were founded, in case you're wondering why this wild land has golf courses. The playing fields are the Richardson Evans that I mentioned before. Licenses, for example, the tea room at the windmill site, which you may have been to get a nice cup of tea or coffee and a cake. Events such as the Fun Fair and Book Fest, they pay us a rental. And charity events, of course, which raise money. We have a friends group who raise money for us, and other ways we do fundraising. Should we be more ambitious with generating income? WPCC land sits in one of the most prosperous areas in London. You know, why are we so underfunded? Our legal advice is that we do not have the power to charge for some things that you might immediately say, why don't you charge for car parking? Our car park at the windmill is probably the last, I'm not exaggerating, probably the last free car park in zone 3. Where else can you park free? You know, it used to be on the council roads like the Causeway, but that's now a residence zone or a paying zone. We don't have the power to charge for that. Other people that you might think ought to pay are professional dog walkers who use our land to earn their living by walking up to 4 dogs, and fitness trainers who use our commons like an open gym. There's no objection to them doing it, but shouldn't they, since they're earning their money on our land, shouldn't they pay something? Well, at the moment we don't have, we've got council's advice on that. We don't have the right to charge them. We could ask them to make a voluntary contribution, and I think a few of them do. We have an access framework in place against which we assess any proposed commercial uses for our land. And if you want to learn more about that, we've got a good website actually, which has a wealth of detail, and wpcc.org.uk. And if you search on access agreement, you'll find out all about it. But briefly, we asked 3 questions. Is the proposed use, lots of people come with saying, can we do this or that on the commons land? So this is what we have to ask. Is the proposed use compatible with our stated purpose of exercise and recreation? In the context of the commons being established to be used for recreational purposes for the public benefit, but subject to the duty to protect and conserve vegetation and wildlife, would the proposed use cause unacceptable levels of damage? And lastly, would the proposed use cause interference with other uses that couldn't be readily managed? So I mention all of this because people have come with ideas like a boxing match, regular car boot sales, pop concerts. I mean, near the windmill, you could imagine putting up a huge marquee and having some of those things. Now, we've always said no and used our access framework to give a reason. Now, I mean, I can see some of you shaking your head, and I think our founders would turn in their graves if we ever did that. Of course, some people say they're having a fun fair there by Rushmere is nearly as bad. But it seems that Rushmere, the fun fair does pass the test, and it's been there for some time. It's only for a week, twice a year, I think. These things are controversial. And there you see, there you have an illustration of the contradictions between our need to remain solvent and have adequate funds on the one hand, and on the other hand, to preserve the commons for quiet contemplation and the vegetation and wildlife and so on and so forth. These are quite difficult decisions. Let's look at other contradictions and pressures and conflicts implicit in preserving a modern suburban wild site. We've had a massive growth in the number of visitors, human and dog, and cyclists, particularly through the pandemic. Now, that's not in itself bad. I mean, our whole purpose is to be open to the public for them to enjoy a lovely open space. So no one would say, we don't want the public to come. Of course not. But they don't always behave very well. And the sheer weight of numbers in itself is a problem. I mean, there's been, over the pandemic, there has been inconsiderate behavior. Can you believe that? For example, littering. I'm sure anyone who goes to the Commons has noticed during the pandemic, piles of empty beer cans, coffee cups, just general litter scattered everywhere. We had to put, for heaven's sake, skips by Rushmere, not big bins, but actual skips. And they were getting filled up, and we were paying a lot of money to have them emptied frequently, just to manage that amount of litter. And a lot of time of the rangers who should be patrolling and providing security was taken up by managing all that. Dog owners' poor behavior is another one. So allowing dogs to enter areas clearly signposted as closed for the wildlife breeding season, such as the plain where we have ground nesting birds. Skylarks, thank you, skylarks. And the ducklings in Rushmere, for example, we put polite signs up and a lot of dog owners ignore them. And when I have politely gone up to a dog owner and remonstrated that we're asking for dogs not to enter the pond because of the sweet baby ducklings or sweet baby skylarks in the case of the plain, I get responses varying from, oh, I didn't see the sign. I mean, they're about every 5 meters, to just plain abuse and threatening behavior. I mean, it's horrific. Water pollution, air pollution, car parking. Sometimes, the car park is completely full and people park badly and inconsiderately. Noise pollution. I mean, one example of that is a threatened increase through Heathrow expansion of aircraft noise. Now, one perhaps good effect of the pandemic is that threat has gone away for the time being. I don't think any investor is keen to expand Heathrow when it's only 3/4 full. But that probably will come back. You know what the, excuse me while I get on my platform for a moment. What the planners did apparently, they looked at the map of housing density around Heathrow, and some bright fella said, hey, there's a whole corridor of very low density land. Look, this one says, what is it, Wimbledon Common? And then there's Richmond Park and a little Bushy Park and somewhere else. We can have a whole aeroplane motorway without disturbing many people. Well, you know, insofar as their duty is to minimize aircraft noise to housing, maybe that, maybe that is a legitimate way forward. But what it means is that our poor commons, you know, the users who are looking for quiet contemplation, the wildlife who get disturbed by the noise, not to mention atmospheric pollution, not to mention occasionally things dropping off airplanes, are going to suffer. And the fact that Wimbledon Commons just here is relatively high up compared to neighbouring land means that the aircraft coming into Heathrow are less high above the land here than they would be over, say, Wandsworth. And if you think about it, I mean, if a plane is at a fixed height and the land comes up, then it's the distance between the plane and the land is less. There are other things which don't sound quite so damaging, but it has been expressed that children come to the commons, and we want to encourage children, of course, but oh dear, there aren't any playgrounds or things to keep them amused. You know, do we really want to have playgrounds, perhaps by the windmill? What about accessibility, wheelchair-friendly paths? Now, I'm very sympathetic to that, and we do have a small accessible path near the windmill that goes around the trees there. But do we really want to make, you know, every path on the commons up to the standard which a wheelchair user could use? I mean, I'm not being sarcastic or negative. It's a genuine dilemma that we have to think about. We want disabled people to enjoy the commons, but do we want every path to change from being a little rural wild path to being a minimum sort of 3-foot wide tarmac or very high grade stone path? And by the way, I know the National Trust have done that on a few of their wild sites, like on some cliff walks. I think Beachy Head is one of these, for example. But it's something that we will have to think about carefully in the coming years. Now, on our so-called undeveloped wild space, should we have litter and dog waste bins along the paths? You know, the argument there is that if you don't, people are just going to sling their stuff into the bushes or drop them on the path. If we do, that makes it that much more like an urban park rather than a wild commons. Should paths be signposted? Should there be a demarcation of cycle paths or bridleways? By the way, I must say, the one group of users we don't have problems with is the horse riders. They behave very well. Keeps the bridle paths, don't bother anyone. I can't say that about, I mentioned dog walkers already, and the other one is cyclists. I mean, there are quite a lot of irresponsible cycle users who cycle very fast in areas not suitable for bikes, where there could be little kids running around, which is the whole idea. Anyway, so here is our dilemma about our sweet little girl cyclists. Having said all of those things and put some questions to you, I came up with some options. One of them would be to say, tough luck, kids do fall off bikes, and this is a wild space. So that's an option. Okay, some of you agree. Or we could, and by the way, I've taught several children to cycle in my time, and of course they do fall off, and the trick is to sort of manage it so they really don't hurt themselves too much. They have a soft fall if possible. Falling into a muddy puddle might not be the best experience. Second of all, we could put a sign, a warning sign at the start of a path that it's in poor condition. And in fact, I mentioned this dilemma to a friend, and he said, "Oh, you should get your lawyers to draft a no liability sign, because there's the other problem, that if someone does hurt themselves and says it's a cycle path, you could get sued for an implied promise of safety and it wasn't safe, so we'll have perhaps other lawyers in the room. I'm not a lawyer, but that's the sort of nightmare scenario that we start to get litigation. Third one is we could close a cycle path when it's in poor condition. By close, I mean put a sign in the front saying, sorry guys, this path is wet and has potholes and it's not safe, please don't use it. You can probably think some of the problems are all the cyclists will just find a different route on even less safe paths where people are not expecting them. And a fourth one would be to drain the path, you know, remove the puddles and tarmac it, or build a high standard of stone or whatever, like the Inner Windmill Road, which we did do, because that's always been of road quality. Well, what do you think? Or perhaps someone has a different option. What should we do about cyclists on muddy and potholed paths? So we should maybe just have a little sign saying cycle at your own risk. Yeah. Anybody have a different view?
Can I ask you, did the father and the daughter, did the father come back to you? I mean, did he bring it up with, I don't know, the famous?
This was very recent. I picked it up because I thought it was an interesting dilemma. I believe he has submitted a formal complaint. We have a complaints procedure, and it hasn't gone further than that yet.
But it will be, if somebody will further.
It may, maybe. I mean, he might just say, well, you know, at least I've made my point and I'll go away.
Because that may end up as a test case.
It could do. It could do, yes. It's quite worrying. So one other one could be to say no more cycling in the commons, period.
It kind of depends, though, I mean, I can imagine one of my kids something on a path and there's a puddle and actually the kid kind of disappears down the puddle. I mean, it's so deep, you know, so it sort of depends really. I mean,
Well,
you know, it's not that straightforward in a sense. It kind of depends on how deep the puddle is and how dangerous it might be to do.
I agree. It's not straightforward. If it's a sinkhole or something, then clearly you have to do something. You have sort of thing that a bus could fall into, you mean? Yeah. God forbid, yeah. We do have a sort of gentle program of filling in the worst potholes, just really by sort of crude process of someone coming along with wheelbarrows and stones and filling in the bad potholes. But we have a DEFRA appointed conservator as one of our 8 board members, and he pointed out that draining potholes or puddles could have effects on the surrounding environment. So, I mean, these things are quite complex and it's quite a fragile space.
I wonder whether, in fact, because it was in 1864, there was a law passed when they went through Parliament to make the Commons independent, whether, in fact, we need to lobby to have another discussion at least in the House.
Yes. Well,
because it doesn't only apply to women, it applies to other rights.
Yes, true. Well, in the municipal park, which, you know, think of Wandsworth Common, Clapham Common and so on, those, they have the word common in them, but they're not really commons, they're parks. And there they do have good quality paths, tarmac paths, and they have marked cycle paths. And I'm sure if they got a pothole there or something similar, they would fix it.
But that's not the same category.
It's absolutely not the same. No, that's my point. Now, we have, I'm not sure if this really answers your question, but we have, one of our committees is, we call it the Constitutional Committee, and they are looking at possible changes to the law that we would welcome in order to allow us to, for example, charge for car parking. It seems inequitous that we can't do that. And by the way, don't tell anyone I said this, but we have some evidence that some of the people who are using our car park work at Parkside Hospital and they just walk along the short Windmill Drive, which is, if you think about it, absolutely outrageous. So next time you go, maybe you have an elderly disabled relative, you want to park there for a quick little walk or a visit to the tea room, and you can't find parking. because a whole lot of high roller consultants have taken the spaces. It's outrageous.
Built a building over their car park. Over their staff car park. That's when it started, when they built over their car park.
Do you know, I didn't know that. And it used to be allowed to park in the road, didn't it? And so Women Common, the one the 93 bus goes along, but they put a double yellow line there now.
I just ask, we've been walking the dog for years on Common. It might just be a feeling, I think it becomes slightly boggy over the last few years, particularly if there's heavy rain. It does seem to sort of stay. I mean, this winter was very bad, and there was on 8 paths as well as on. And I wonder if, and I know the rainfall records, that there's not much more rainfall in London. There is slightly more than there was in the past, but it's marginal.
Well,
I wonder, is it just the common? I mean, you mentioned the historical document, they talk about bogs. Is it more boggy now?
I was just going to refer to the old Spencer in the mid-19th century saying it was damp and noxious.
Yes.
So I don't know. Look, the year before last was it 2020, a very dry summer. Some of the ponds nearly dried out and the grass went brown. So
There's a variety of soil.
there's a variety of soil. Much of it is quite poor soil
And sandy.
and sandy. Not all of it, but some of it's sandy. Some of it has good and some of it has poor drainage. So there's quite a variety of that. And that's one reason that the Commons supports all the different habitats that it does. What makes it so valuable? Absolutely. So we don't want to make any profound changes to that, but whether it's got more boggy, I've never heard any evidence of that, but it's interesting.
Sort of what feels, it does seem to spend less time being dry than it used to. So I do remember a couple of years ago, it was very dry. But no, I just wondered, and because people talk about, because it runs off, doesn't it, to the surrounding places, including Wimbledon Parkway, water, and of course there's so many basements now being built around here, and it's stopping the water flowing, and that may well also start on the common, I don't know.
Yeah, well, that is a very interesting point. And another hat I wear, which I didn't mention, I'm the retiring chairman of the local residents association, retiring because I'm handing over the role in November. That's the St John's Area Residents Association, which covers a lot of Parkside Ward. Mary and I live in Denmark Road, and it is certainly said in Denmark Road and Denmark Avenue, that's a steep bit that goes down to Walpole Road, that there's been a lot of distortion of these water courses due to basements. And the stories about, say, one person putting in a basement and the next house up the hill from him getting flooded suddenly because the water has nowhere to go. If you look at, we have, as an association, I've gone off my script a bit, but it's an interesting point. If you look at the planning applications, which we've done as an association because we've objected to some of them on the grounds, really the grounds that you're referring to. Now, these applications have to contain a soil and subterranean water investigation. Now, my background is geology, and what they often put in, done by their planning consultant, is laughable. They have maybe one or maximum 2 paragraphs saying, we did a couple of little test boreholes and we find no evidence to, blah, blah, blah. There you go. They never do. So I think the council probably does have powers to do much more on that than they are doing.
A further question. You mentioned, I mean, we recently keep on animals and that bit in the skylocks. But I always think that don't the foxes get them? I mean, don't you have lots of foxes in the common sparrows? And I mean, I'm sure the dogs will get them if they could.
I suspect, look, I'm not a bioscientist, but I suspect that the answer would be that is part of nature's wonderful way of natural selection or whatever it is. But dogs, of course, are not part of the natural system at all. I mean, for sure there are foxes and sparrowhawks and probably badgers. We certainly have badgers. Do they really? No. I know about the badgers because we once had a dog who was chasing badgers and went down a badger set and got stuck in it. And then the owner came to us demanding that we dig the dog out. And it was an ancient protected, set. We all got pretty angry about it. But to be fair, he brought a box of chocolates in for the people. I mean, the things, the size of human nature you see when you're in this business are amazing. Anyway, if you don't mind, I'll just conclude my talk. I've nearly got to the end, but not quite. But I've enjoyed the discussion so far. So we've got, with the little girl cyclist, everything from saying tough luck, it happens, to draining the place and putting tarmac down, and another one being just we won't have any cycling on the commons at all. By the way, cycling was in the two elections where I stood, cycling was the biggest source of questions that we got in the hustings, for example, when part of the election process is that we have a husting in Wimbledon and in Putney, and we had lots of questions about cycling. Some people want to cycle super highways, go around the commons or across the commons. And I personally think we could have a few more cycle paths, but I'm not keen to have a real network of them. And by the way, when I say super highway, I'm being slightly tongue in cheek. That's what I think what Boris called them. But we're really talking about places where people can cycle that would keep them safely away from the road, but also available from the walkers and users. So let me just conclude my remarks. I'd like to just talk a little bit on the science, which is also part of natural philosophy as a science. It's a bit less controversial, this. The commons is an important habitat for wildlife. Significant parts are a national nature reserve and a site of special scientific interest. And this is particularly because of the importance of the grassland and heathland habitats that we have. So there are very few low altitude heathlands left in the southeast, not just in London. We have a wide variety of habitats from freshwater to woodlands, resulting in an impressive and surprisingly large range of flora and fauna, which makes the commons, by the way, a great place for spotting wildlife and observing seasonal changes in the plants and animals. Excellent opportunities for painting, photography, listening to bird song, and so on. We do have one of our staff is Conservation and Engagement Officer, Peter Haldane, and his email address, by the way, is given on the website. So if you have questions to the staff about conservation related matters, you can talk to him. And we also have I mentioned the DEFRA appointed conservator, Oliver Bennett. He's new on the board, but he's an expert on the environmental aspects of wildlife management. And of course, we use, as well as our staff, we have a lot of volunteers, such as college and school age students, partner agencies like the River Authority that helped us to improve Beverley Brook down at the west end of the commons. And they do a lot of monitoring of species, counting stag beetles, all that sort of good stuff. They also do scrub bashing, which is sort of clearing away some of the undergrowth and weeds that shouldn't be there, litter picking and things like that. And another less attractive job that we have to do is managing invasive species like oak processionary moth and Japanese knotweed. Unfortunately, both of those are present on the commons. So with that note on the flora and fauna, I've reached the end of my prepared talk. We've had a good discussion already, but I'd like to suggest the chair might take questions and discussion points, and I'll be happy to provide answers if I can.
All right, so do we want to take a quick break and drink the rest of the wine, or you want to go right into the discussion? Go right into the discussion, all right. All right, thank you, Peter, for a very interesting discussion about something that we all hold very near and dear to our hearts here. I want to ask, before we go directly into the conversations, does anyone online have, there's a couple people left online, and you've been very patient, and so I will give you the floor first if someone wants to ask a question, in case you want to drop off after that. Anyone online?
Um,
Hi, Brian. Yes.
Hi.
We'll try to listen to you and translate the question to the audience.
Whoops. Can you hear me, Ed? Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm the only one online, but it's been brilliant, worthwhile. As a kid, I've ridden my bicycle all over Wimbledon Common, but at least I wasn't nasty. And it was fun being chased by guys on horses. We always got away, but we didn't do any damage. And I lost my my tin yacht on Wimbledon Common because I was there with my parents sailing it in Queensmere. It was the first air raid, and we all ran. I took the yacht with me to the ditch, but we forgot to bring it back again. So anyway, I'm delighted that the Wimbledon Common was there then, and it's there now, and I'd give anything to keep it there.
Oh, yeah. This is something we can all agree to, Brian. Thank you. Thank you for the comment. A couple of things I want to say just about ecology in general as a movement, which became really big in the United States in the 60s to early 70s. One of the greatest albums of all time, Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," really dealt with that, right? It was the beginning of the movement and became part of the consciousness of the late 60s and 70s. One of the issues that we deal with in modern societies is that we come out of, specifically here in Great Britain, is we come out of a culture of Christianity where Adam and Eve were given dominion over the land and over the animals in the beginning in the book of Genesis. And we're dealing a lot of times with the effects of that and the outcomes of what that has produced in our society. And Peter's touched on a couple of these issues today. And specifically when the dominion to name the animals and to take over the land and to cultivate it and make it their own, a lot of the abuses that we see that have carried on even today are based on a sort of reading of theology that goes back to these very texts. So this is something that is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts and is used in ways to continue the situation as normal. So I think ecology is something that is very relevant. Peter talked about natural philosophy. If you go into Aristotle and Aquinas, it is a topic that is dealt with very specifically. What is the relationship of man to nature, and what is the relationship of man to the cosmos? So not only the relationship of being guardians of the earth and what our relationship is there, but also relationship to God in general. And that it should mirror the relationship, and specifically in Aquinas, that it should mirror the relationship that God has with us in terms of being a conservator, which is Peter's trying to do, of the land that has been given to us as well. So these are very broad themes that go back really to the origins of philosophy and how we should be dealing with what our relationship is in the environment. For example, Peter is saying that there are birds nesting, there are microorganisms. I see people out looking at the trees. There's some sort of bug that is eating the leaves on the trees. They're marking the trees. I walk through there and I see people that are measuring different things. So there's really a move for conserving what's there and preserving, for future generations. So I think it's a timely topic that you brought to us, Peter. So I thank you very much for that. All right, so I think the best way to go to questions would be I'm gonna come over here and then let Peter stand up and talk directly into the microphone. So it's questions. All right.
Come to the mic, can you hear me?
Come to the mic, yeah.
Two practical things. How much of the common is mown, if any? And also on the business of rewilding, is there any policy there or sowing a selection of wildflowers to create new rewilded? I know the whole common's meant to be wild, but the flowers that are there might be a particular limited variety.
Is there any policy about rewilding, and how much is mown ever?
These are great questions, Alan, and I'm not sure that I can give you very precise answers. The mowing policy, by the way, changed. We didn't mow so much this year, as I'm sure many of you noticed. This was partly in response to the very heavy footfall of these extra new recent users during the pandemic, who were, I didn't really even mention it, but inadvertently, just by being so many people, were damaging the grass and the paths. And I know that's a problem that many wild and semi-wild sites have, like the Lake District. And they have, in some cases, been paving or putting stones on paths, not exactly paving them to help protect them. But that doesn't answer your question. This is an operational matter. We Conservatives don't decide. The staff do, when and how much is mown. But of course, we give an overall, if you like, strategic setting to what the staff should do. It's, as far as I know, it's the sort of public areas like around Rushmere, which is the bit pretty near here where the pond is. Often they have mown a strip near to the A219 to Wimbledon Parkside and some areas around the windmill. And this year we didn't do so much. And whether that's a permanent change, I'm not exactly sure. I will find out actually. Oh, yes, thank you. Now, of course, there's the golf course, and they have their own procedures. Of course, golf greens and tees have to be mown. And I did mention before, that golf course existed before the commons were formed, so we can't kick them off. And their revenue, their rental for the greens, as well as for the building that the London Scottish clubhouses are building. The Wimbledon Common golf course is not, that's their own building over by the Royal. So they look after their own course, but they do discuss that with us. Now, as for rewilding and planting wildflowers, I don't, on Wimbledon and Putney Common, the main area of Wimbledon Common and Putney Heath, I don't think we do it very much, but down on Wimbledon and down on Putney Lower Common, they do have, I don't know if you've been down there, but they have a lot of wildflowers. And I think we've sort of helped nature with that. And it's really lovely in late spring. It's unknown, and there's just a lot of colour in the meadows, a bit like you see in the Alps. So I'm not quite sure how much help we've given nature. And we're certainly not, obviously not going to start planting foreign species that don't belong there, but I'm not quite sure what to add to that. We don't mow those areas on Putney Lower Commons, just the bits near the paths.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? The way you phrased your question, it was about flowers and mowing, but the Beverley Brook, the river, the stream, there's been an attempt to rewild.
Oh, thank you.
That,
yes, I think a pretty good attempt. That was, thanks for mentioning it, Mary. We did this work in connection with the South East River Authority, I think it was, a charity who specialised in dealing with rivers. And we had a very interesting talk at one of the public meetings on the Commons about a year ago. I think it was a spring talk last year, shortly before the pandemic. Anyway, the idea was that the Beverley Brook had been partly canalised, put into concrete banks and straightened, so it just ran straight down. It had become rather antiseptic and very little wildlife left in it. And what the Rivers Trust did with, in discussion with us and Natural England, I think as well, was to remove some of those concrete borders, banks of the river, and allow it to meander a bit more, and to partly break the flow of water by putting dead trees in there, which create fast bits and slow bits, which the fish like. And there's been a noticeable and also to cut away some of the trees very close to the river to let more light in. And all of those things together has greatly encouraged the wildlife down there. So there are now more fish and more birds that, you know, use or feed in the water. And that's not the entire length of the Beverley Brook within the Commons. Some of it couldn't be treated in that way for other reasons. But a lot of it has been, and I think it's a good improvement. Go and have a look at it.
I don't know about regrassing, I think some of the invasive ferns which have invaded the grass have been removed.
Okay. Do you mean down by Beverley Brook or in general?
In general, we're
Yeah.
talking about regrassing.
Okay.
I think rather than regrassing, we encourage them by removing some of the
That's-
invasive plants.
That's probably part of what the scrub bashers do. By the way, I noticed that on Richmond Park, there is a lot of fern, terrific lot of fern, which we don't have. Maybe that's the reason. Thanks.
You call your talk managing wild sites. What percentage is wild when you take out the golf courses, the windmill, and the playing fields and everything else? In terms of acres.
I don't have the figure in my head. I would think, it's a good question, not to mention the access road and the inner windmill road and other bits and pieces. And of course, there are buildings which were there before, again, before we were founded, like keepers' cottages in various places like Springwell, the Manor Cottage, which is also our office and headquarters, Springwell and others.
Is that where the cockerel is?
I'm sorry?
Is that where the cockerel is? Sometimes when I go past, there's a cockerel crow.
Okay,
I believe me.
right, I wasn't aware of that.
It's near the golf course.
That is such a good question. I would think the answer is probably about 2/3.
800 acres.
It's 1,140 hectares. I can't remember how many acres that is. So I would say it's probably about 700 or 800 hectares is wild. But of course, what is wild? I mean, we've got footpaths, we've got cycle track, all the things like bridleways, signposts, rubbish bins, all the things I was talking about. Signs warning of thin ice. Again, there's another little dilemma. When it's a cold winter and there's a little bit of ice, should we put signs up saying, you know, you'd be stupid if you walk on this because you might fall in and drown?
But you do.
But you do, and we do. But there's probably an argument to say, no, it's supposed to be a wild site. We're not a nanny state. Well, we could get sued. Yes, indeed.
You do have quite a little wild site. Most of the is quite open.
Some of it is a bit. Yeah, particularly on the slope, right? After when you walk through the golf course and go down.
I mean, occasionally I've been to the golf. Something big problem, something, you know, knee-high stone. Why going to those sides?
Well, of course, some people enjoy that, and you know, getting lost, getting away from the noise. Of course, it's hard to get away from the noise because there's such a big area where you can hear either the A3 near Tillard's Corner or the A3 down beyond Beverley Brook, and that's a shame. I didn't even mention traffic noise pollution. I was focusing on aircraft, but what can you do? We're in London, and you can't make them put the A3 in a tunnel, I suppose.
You know, this raised a question. Is the Caesar camp within the part of the commons or not?
That's not in our land.
Okay.
I believe the freehold of that land is owned by Wimbledon and Manor, but it's leased to the Royal.
Okay.
The Caesar camp is part of the golf course, the Royal Wimbledon Golf Course. And they initially invited everybody to walk there during the pandemic when they were playing golf. And then I think they also must have got problems with misbehavior and they closed it off as much as they could.
So there's another question. How do I call them the Merton Mounties or Rangers fit into the scheme of things?
Right. They're Mounties because they are horseback patrols. During the pandemic, the horses had been put out to grass somewhere in Surrey, so they did not.
I didn't see much of it.
No, they did not patrol on horseback. By the way, this is unique. The Royal Parks don't have mounted rangers. I don't think any of the commons and parks around here have them. They use the motorized buggies, the little vehicles. And that's what we used during the pandemic as well. The rangers like being on horseback. By the way, many of them are retired police officers, often from the mounted, I wanted to say regiments, what's the right word, divisions. Because they can see better what's going on, they get a bit closer to people possibly misbehaving rather than in a vehicle. So their primary job is security. It's supposed to provide security to stop people attacking each other, but also to stop bad behavior of, say, cyclists. But interestingly, they're not, what's the word? In Britain, police officers are warranted, aren't they? They have a warrant card that gives them certain powers, like arrest or writing fixed penalty notices. Our rangers are not. So they can take your name and address and send you a stiff letter, but they can't actually issue spot fines or arrest people. They can just give you warning. And the whole area of enforcement is quite a hot topic on our board, actually, because we have increasing evidence of low-level misbehavior along the lines I was talking about. And the feeling that we're not really able to deal with it quite as robustly as we need to be able to.
Is there a drug problem in the common?
A drugs problem?
Yeah.
Apparently they do sometimes find discarded drug paraphernalia, the press call it, I suppose syringes and things. And there have been stories in the summer of people camping out there, possibly drug use. I've seen that. I've seen it, yes. I mean, remember, it is it's in our constitution that it's unenclosed. We couldn't conceivably fence it in. The royal parks are fenced. And you might have one or two 24-hour entrances like Richmond Park is one or two. But it's totally against our constitution and our ethos to enclose it. So you can't really stop people staying into the night or entering at night and getting up to whatever people do get up to. I should have mentioned, by the way, and it is relevant, fire risk. Now, right now, in the current weather, that doesn't seem much of a problem, but we have had one small fire during the time I was conservator, and last summer, so 2020, we had very hot, dry spell, we mentioned that before, and there was a very high fire risk. I was once at the windmill, at the office, the Manor Cottage, when two rangers came back excitedly in their buggy because the horses were out to grass, and they had confiscated a barbecue. Someone had been barbecuing, in the grass on the plain near to trees. I mean, this is just unbelievably mad, because they could have started what we've seen. And there was a big forest-type fire in Surrey, South Surrey somewhere, a little bit before that. And in Lancashire, there was a terrible moor fire. No one was killed, but a huge lot of damage was done. So we're very anxious to avoid that. We do, I'll just mention, we do some planning with the fire brigade, and we do drills with them. So they are prepared. They know where our water points are, not too many actually, but and how they can access different parts of our site.
Quickly answer just one question.
Sure. Did you say answer?
No, ask.
Oh, what a pity. That was wishful thinking. You were going to answer something.
No, you alluded to this right at the start of the talk, actually, and it's the finances.
Oh, yeah.
And what you could or could not do. And I just wondered how concerned you are about that, because, I mean, when you were talking, I felt very concerned in terms of how you could raise money, for example. And you're absolutely right in terms of the car park. At the moment, it's free, and most of the other places all around here, you do have to pay for it. I mean, what sort of measures could you deploy in terms of, is this a huge issue?
Yeah. While I answer, I'm just going to top up my glass. My throat's getting a bit dry. It is a huge issue. In fact, people have asked me, what do you spend most of your time in board meetings discussing? And they probably have in their mind, you know, is it the skylarks or the oak processionary moth, or is it the potholes on the paths or whatever? And I'm sorry to tell you, the two areas where we spend most of our time discussing is finance and the whole, issues of governance. Just like any charity, those are tremendously important. I mean, in my time, we had a special investigation, by the Charity Commission, and a whole lot of stuff which we inherited from the previous board that I mentioned just briefly at the beginning. I didn't want to get into that stuff, but we had very big governance issues early on, which I'm glad to say we've progressed, largely moved past. As for finances, it is a real headache, and it's an everyday problem. And we're very, very constrained in what we can do to raise more money. And particularly during the pandemic, as I said, we lost revenue from sporting events and other things, and we got extra costs due to rubbish clearance and other things. So our finances are not in good shape. I'll be honest, they're not in good shape.
They gone from the EU as well.
I'm not aware of it. Well, no, I don't. I think we can kiss that money goodbye now. But okay, it may be that we do sometimes get specific grants to do work on, say, wildlife investigations, or, for instance, we got a grant to do the work on the Beverley Brook, but that was designated just for that project. We had fundraising for specific areas, like refurbishing that inner Windmill Road, the one that goes from Manor Cottage to Springwell. And I think we did a very good job of that. And that was, we raised the money quite quickly. I'm not embarrassed about that road because it always was a road. And then sometimes in the past it's been open to traffic, but it's never open to traffic now. EU grants or central government grants, I think they would be for specific projects related to things like site of special scientific interest. I'm not aware of any current ones. But in a way, we're not very keen to attract or solicit funds from central government because we don't want to become dependent like the royal parks are, or indeed municipal parks and commons are on the local authorities. I mean, we have heard apocryphally that the local authorities would quite like to take us over. And we don't think that would be very helpful to you, the users of Wimbledon Commons. Sorry.
So is there an ID version then manageable? ID manage all the parks and sites and everything.
With minimum wage staff and so on. Yeah, we are very unkeen to have anything like that. I mean, I think it's fair to say, I didn't want to get into that whole governance issue at the beginning, but we had two individuals, one in particular, who had been on the board before 2018, who were extremely strongly opposed to both the staff and the board. And it seemed their ultimate goal, I don't want to sound paranoid, but there's some evidence that they wanted to bring us down and have the Commons taken over by Merton and Wandsworth. Sure. And we fought, we never said that explicitly, by the way, don't quote me please, but we fought very hard to make sure that wouldn't happen.
So we have, we're about at the end of our time right now. So unless someone has a really pressing question that needs immediate response, we're going to wrap this up for the evening. And thank you again, Peter, for the talk. Thank you everyone for attending the AGM. I think everything went very well considering it's the first time we've had it here in this room. And I will be sending out a follow-up communication with a link to Peter's talk and to the AGM, as I said, on the YouTube channel, so you can go and review that and review anything else that you may have missed in the past. prior to joining, or if you've missed some of the meetings. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to write me directly. I usually get back to you, within a couple of days. And so thank you, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you in December, hopefully for Lord Gus O'Donnell at the Southside House. Oh, I do need to turn it off. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I've actually saved it to the cloud, so I didn't save it to your machine. Let me turn this off. Stop recording. Okay.